Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to have Michael Hershfield with us today for a conversation on pursuing entrepreneurship with a law degree. Michael is a graduate of the UBC Law School who spent the last 15 years plus in the technology sector as an investor and serial entrepreneur. Most recently, he is the founder and CEO of Accrue Savings, which offers a co-branded saving wallet in participation with merchants for consumers. We're going to start out by kind of going through your professional history, Michael, starting with law school and then ending up with your current venture at Accrue. So to start the conversation off, could you just tell us a bit about your background and how you ended up at UBC Law School?
Absolutely. It's always meaningful to get the chance to reflect and to reflect with a place that I have such fond memories on and had played such an important role, pivotal role in my early educate or my development. So I have a lot of gratitude to talk to you today, Camden. So thank you again for inviting me. My career is one that is not necessarily linear. I thought when I was in elementary school and high school that all I wanted to be in my life was a lawyer. And that is not what I'm doing now. And very much not what I'm doing now. But it's not that I regret my path to law. I think law was the best thing that I could do for myself and in my career, and has empowered me for my entire life. I graduated, I should say, I articled in Toronto for Faskins, summered at Faskins in Toronto, actually worked in a New York law firm by chance that summer between first year and second year of law school. So for some of you that are on this call that are at different stages of the career, I always had a little bit of like be somewhere else in my life, explore and discover some other things. But when I was articling, I knew very quickly in that articling experience that it wasn't for me. That
how did you know that? Because I feel like I didn't article, right? So I went to law school in the U.S. I worked in the U.S. There's no articling in the U.S. So I didn't article, but like my understanding is the articling experience, it's like kind of a, correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of like a grab bag of different practice areas. You get to try different things. You get to work with different people. So like, how did you like kind of describe that sense that you got that practicing law was not for you? Because I actually think that that's something that law students need to hear, that you can go to law school and you can be successful and you can have a satisfying career, even if the actual practice of law doesn't speak to you.
Well, to be transparent, what I knew to be true in that experience was that I, on the 42nd floor of Faskin, or between their 7 or 8 floors, I never felt there was someone older than me that I wanted to become, or that wasn't me. That I didn't feel like were versions of me as a 35-year-old, as a 40-year-old, as a 60-year-old. I think that acknowledgement, and I also had it when I summered in New York between first and second year, that it just didn't feel like I was compatible with the way that I wanted to work, the way that I saw myself, and that uncomfortableness wasn't just because of like the grab bag of diligence projects that I was working on, or line by line M&A work that I was doing, probably doesn't exist anymore. It was because that I didn't imagine myself with like this person older than me, and that was a very hard articling year, because especially when the golden handcuffs were so close. The golden handcuffs were so close. You were doing what you thought you always wanted to do, and it's also what you thought your family wanted you to do. When you make that recognition, is the one that I did, is like, well, now what am I going to pursue in my life? That year in articling was difficult, and I took the leap to not pursue law. Literally at the end of that articling experience, I knew that, and I started my first company right after articling in Toronto, and that was in 2007, 8. And I had no tech experience. And if again, it sort of makes me feel old when I talk about it, but 2007, Toronto was a desert when it comes to technology and venture startups. There was nothing going on there. You could fill I don't know what the UBC Law School is. You could fill a tiny boardroom with all the investors and entrepreneurs that were doing that at the time in Toronto. So I did it almost blindly without really knowing what I was pursuing. And I think like this is a good place, obviously for my own personal career, but it's a good place to for like at law students as a student, it's hard to say it, but like I was so lucky. How privileged am I? And I live in the United States now, so it's like particularly how privileged am I that I was able to make that choice. And for me, I didn't have any debt. But even average Canadian students, right, compared to U.S. law school students, U.S. medical students, the student loan crisis in the United States is so stark. And so I had the opportunity to make an entrepreneurial choice in my life at 25, 26, 27, 28 years old, without that depressing and debilitating pressure that many students, some Canadian students have that as well, but at scale, different than the United States, to sort of pursue a different path. So I started this company, raised a bunch of money in Toronto. The economy went to shit in 2009, and I had to wind my company down, couldn't raise an A. And I was like, what the fuck am I going to do with my life? I tasted entrepreneurship. Even the loneliness of entrepreneurship and the depression of failure, I tasted it, but I did not want to go back and be an investment banker in New York, or I didn't want to be a corporate lawyer in Toronto or in Vancouver. I knew that I wanted something different in my life, that I wanted color, that element of mosaic and color that I thought that I wanted to explore professionally. And New York was that golden Medina for me. I'd never really, I'd visited it and I said, I'm going to stay in startups. And I knew a couple of people here and was lucky enough to get a job. You know, one of the pleasures of being a lawyer in Canada is you are able to get into the United States with a TN visa. And again, talk about privilege, right? As a Canadian law school graduate, you have leverage to get different types of jobs in your life because you have a TN visa. And so I got very lucky to get a job in Toronto doing BD and legal affairs, about 20% legal and 80% business development at an early stage company in New York. New York was also a very small tech community in 2010. And my career has sort of never looked back. From there, I went to another startup and ran business development and corporate development. And that company subsequently was sold and also raised a bunch of money from well-known investors. And then I went from there. I was COO of another startup. And then I was COO of another startup. And then I started to do some venture, the community of New York.
So just to be clear, so before you articled at Fasken, and then you kind of founded your company as LiveStub, I assume you're talking about, right? And then kind of sort of stayed in that world. So prior to that, you had no background in tech and you had no background in entrepreneurship. Is that right?
I had no background in either, and again, like I think the world has changed a little bit from when I had this dream to do something different, where because I was an entrepreneur, that gave me the ability to look for jobs that I had no business looking for. At 30 years old, to get the BD job that I got, I had no right to get the director of business development of a well-known early stage company in New York. But the reality is that I had taken the risk in my life to start a company at 27 and left law, so I had a law degree. So you got that you had that kosher symbol, right? You had that approval from the market, and I worked at a well-known Toronto firm, Canadian firm. But like, okay, this person is smart. I went to a good law school, UBC Law School. I started a company, raised a little bit of money. Okay, another symbol of success. And so even though I didn't have a track record from 22 to 29 of business development, the other things that I could bring to the table allowed me to get in the door to get that first job. And once you get the first job, your career can start to get tracked.
It's kind of like fake it till you make it. You kind of had to establish credibility in other ways. So I'm going to interject myself into the conversation because this is I think this is meant to be sort of an informal talk. So I'm not an entrepreneur. I've not pursued a career in entrepreneurship. I teach business law. But it's funny when you're talking about kind of the experience you had articling, because I actually had a very similar sort of realization. It came to me much later. So I practiced law at a large law firm in the US for 5 years. So I was like all in partnership track. Like I was like, I'm gonna do this. Like I was very much kind of chasing that dream. And it was really, really arduous. It was a really tough lifestyle. It was a very, very demanding work environment. But I just kind of like was just sort of pursuing that kind of brass ring of kind of making equity partnership, and I really looked up to the people that I worked for. And so my experience might have been different than yours, and that the people I work for I really admired in a professional sense. Like I did kind of want to be them in a professional sense, but I had this sort of realization like 4 years in that like the kind of the equity partners that I was working for, who'd gotten that brass ring and were like, literally some of the most successful transactional lawyers in the country. Like I kind of thought about like what their lives were like, sort of what their lifestyles were. And like, it wasn't like they made partner and then they just worked a 9 to 5, right? Like they would be, in the office until 10 p.m., talking to clients. And then they would take the train and they have like, an hour ride out to the suburbs and like not even have time to put their kids to bed. And then they'd like, wake up 6:30 in the morning and just do the same thing day in and day. And like, and these were like, guys in their, 40s, 50s. And, you really look like the client called them at, 1 in the morning, like they had to pick up, you know what I mean? And it was just sort of like, I'm like that, it was just so dismal from like a lifestyle standpoint that was a big motivator for me to like try to figure out to do something else in my life.
Yeah.
And like I went into academic, I didn't go into entrepreneurship, but I went into academics. And again, this conversation is about you, it's not about me. But in that moment in my life, that was a very risky move. And like everyone I talked to about it discouraged me from doing it. They're like, you are crazy. They're like, you are making so much money. Like, why would you throw it all away to do something that's like, not even guaranteed to pan out? But it worked out for me. So I guess, maybe both of our experiences kind of speak to the value and the benefits of kind of doing unconventional things, right? If you have a strong feeling.
You have to trust yourself. And Camden, you trust yourself, and I'm sure the people on the call, are working to build the trust in themselves that things are going to, that there's more than one job in the world. It's just not to be a lawyer. There's more than two jobs in the world to be a doctor. And there are many paths to achieve fulfillment in one career. And, the golden handcuffs of being a corporate lawyer can lead one to maybe have a life that they don't necessarily want. And I didn't know better. I was still pretty immature when I was making these choices in my mid to late 20s.
Yeah, right.
I just knew enough to know that like there was still room for me to explore. And that goes back to like one of my first comments that I want to like double click on is like the privilege of being able to go to a great law school like the University of British Columbia, and the privilege to have a law degree gives you a fallback. And you never know what happens in life, but the ability to know that like you can put up the shingle and practice in some capacity and provide for your family, like maybe should be seen as an insurance. I think that's like the one thing around risk. If you go to law school, the unfortunate thing is that you're probably risk averse. I'm unique from a DNA perspective, but what should be told to students is there's room for you to accept risk in your life, and that to pursue other many things like because you have this gift that is being given to you both by the education you're getting and maybe the exposures you're getting early on in your legal career or in your articling or summaring, or as a first-year associate if you decide to work in the United States.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to amplify one of the things that you mentioned about, sort of going to UBC Law School. So one of the reasons I practiced corporate law is I went to law school in the US. I went to a very expensive law school, and I was in that kind of golden handcuff situation, at least sort of temporarily. Like I had to, pay off my law school debt. So I did have to work. I kind of didn't have a choice initially. And I think, graduates of UBC Law School, so students who are watching this or students who are going to, watch the recording, are like very privileged in that, believe it or not, I mean, it may not seem this way as a student, but like UBC Law School is like really cheap. It is like a really, really good value. You get an excellent legal education at remarkably low price by the standards of high quality law school. So it gives you, I think, a little bit more latitude to kind of make those unconventional choices. And I'm kind of looking at the kind of people in the background, and I saw a hand go up. And Michael, would you prefer to leave questions till the end, or do you?
No, I mean, the group is small enough, and obviously there's much more to share. But Colette obviously
Yeah.
would
Given
love
it's
to
a
talk
small
to you.
group, yeah, maybe we could just go. So Colette, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, well, thank you. And I had a question and a comment, but I went to UBC Law School many years ago, and my daughter just started UBC, and I still get
Congrats.
she started first year, not even law school, but having a mom who was a lawyer. So we know, of course, I practiced law for about 20 years in a national firm, and then I actually had my own firm downtown in Vancouver for about 12 years, and then went on to other professions. But I think it's so great to see you talking about this, because I think now, as you say, and you as well, Camden, lifestyle, it's a grueling profession in many ways, just to be honest, very rewarding. I think the one thing that I found, and Camden and Michael, you can add, but the skills you do learn as a law student, but then a lawyer, are invaluable. I was a solicitor, a lot of contract work. And I think it's, I don't know about you, Michael, because you had that great background in your law education, and just quickly share for me, and then I'd like to hear how you think your education and legal skills that you did obtain helped you in your new chapter. I did years of contract drafting and negotiation, and so then I eventually actually became an artist, had a business, and then I ran that for a while, and then I became a realtor through UBC Sauder School. But all through that, I've had to use those legal skills in those professions, and people do respect you for them, and they carry through. So I just share that from my perspective, and not to be afraid to branch out, but maybe to hone those skills is very helpful, even though you kind of so I was curious for you, Michael, what did you find from your law profession that helped you become an entrepreneur? And as well, you've obviously got entrepreneurial skills, and you're not risk adverse. So, but what would you share with, like, my daughter or other students, what you learned from law school that helps you now?
UBC in any law school, but obviously my experience with UBC is that you get to learn a language you didn't know before.
Mm-hmm.
And the practice of law is infused in anything you do in your career. We are constantly negotiating with, whether it's we have negotiated with investors, or for us, it's some of the largest retailers, airlines in the United States and globally, partners. The idea that you can understand that language of business that many people do not have is uniquely empowering, and that's in my own career, and I see that, right. I'm able to have a little bit of I know enough to be deadly when I'm on the phone with some of the largest companies in the United States, trying to push on some terms and push on other. I don't need my lawyer to tell me, or if my counsel is advising me, I can tell them to fuck off, because I know enough to not care about the things they care about or what I care about. And that only happened because I was exposed to the language of law, that foundational work, and because I was attracted to it, even consciously, subconsciously, you sort of like I throughout my career. I've been able to sort of like continue to learn, even though I wasn't practicing law. So if I'm negotiating deals at other jobs that I've had, I felt very comfortable. I was at WeWork for 3.5 years. Some of you may know the company WeWork. I worked for WeWork for 3.5 years. I was comfortable to have real estate conversations when we were leasing buildings all over the world. So coming in and out of different parts of my role there, because of the fact that Professor I remember his Farquhar, like I may not have done that well in that class, but I still learned a lot, or maybe I did. I don't even remember anymore. Because that class gave me the foundational elements to weave yourself into conversations and dynamics that are diverse. And I think that's what's distinct about a law degree versus other degrees. There's a universality to it. There's a humanity to it as well. So even in my personal life, right, the idea that you can understand issues, whether it's family law issues, wills and estates issues, urban planning issues, because of the fact that you foreign policy issues potentially, because you allowed yourself that discovery during those 3 years, and maybe during your articling, or maybe during your first 2 years if you decide to practice for a little bit. Every person is different, right? My journey is just an example that I think UBC law students should take the opportunity to, have to model against it, but at least reflect on, right? I put myself out there to see what the world gave me, and I didn't necessarily follow the path of the most classic path of a UBC law student, someone who grew up in Vancouver, which I did. I just followed a different path.
So, Michael, I want to kind of take the conversation sort of beyond the law. I think that I totally agree with everything you just said about the value of a law degree. And one of the things that I learned sort of being a corporate lawyer is I had to learn a lot about business, right? So kind of ironically, I feel like I've become relatively fluent in the language of business, right? Fluent enough to be dangerous, as you put it, but I can, sort of have conversations and give a semblance that I know what I'm talking about. I want to talk a little bit more about your substantive business experience, right? So you founded Livestub, you then went on and you've worked as an investor and as a principal at a number of different organizations. What can you tell us about your overall career, kind of up until the point that you founded Accrue? And in particular, I want to hit on what have been some high points, what have been some low points, what are some things that you're really proud of, what are some things that have been disappointing, and have you ever regretted not following that more traditional corporate law path?
There's little regret there's little regret in the choices, but I will tell you my career path has not been easy. It has definitely been sexy. It has definitely been compelling, and there are lots of stories to tell, which we'll talk about it. And maybe everyone's career is not easy in different ways. But when my career path chose industries, or an industry which is really startup technology, which is incredibly mercurial, which companies come and go on a yearly basis. Even the well-capitalized ones that many of the companies that have raised money from some of the best investors in the world, the alpha opportunity also creates zeros quickly, and that can be incredibly emotional and a roller coaster for a person.
Well, so correct me if I'm wrong. So I teach, I have a corporate transactions class, and I teach about venture capital. And what I always tell my students is that, venture capital as an investment industry, right? It's a home run business, right? So you're investing in companies with the idea that most of them are going to fail, right?
Yes,
and you're going to make all your return, right? But and I'm thinking of it from a VC standpoint. So from the standpoint of an investor, it's you're diversified, right? So it's a little bit less emotional. But when you're actually an entrepreneur and you're a founder, you are one of those zeros, right? If your company fails, you have to figure out what to do, right?
That's correct. You have. My own experiences. We can work backwards. I just worked at one of the most famous or infamous companies in the last 20 years. And I had a front row seat to that experience. I was a senior executive at WeWork. I saw the highs were incredibly high. And I will tell you a little bit of my personal journey. Before I joined WeWork, I was at a number of early stage companies, including the one that I started, that on paper would have seen me take a fast track to financial and personal success. And it didn't happen. And that mercurial experience led me at 35 years old with at that point, one child, to look for something safe. Funny to say it, but WeWork to me looked very safe compared to a 7-person, 10-person, 15-person seed Series A stage company. And I went there, and I had never won before. So talking about, like, obviously, Colette, you talked to this about experiences. I and athletes talk about this a lot too, right? Learning to win. And so I was looking for an experience that gave me that exposure to getting balls in the hoop, getting pucks in the net, scoring tries. Played rugby for many years. And when I went to WeWork, there's never been a boom company in the history of time that grew at the rate that we were growing at. And I obviously had a number of amazing seats. I ran a business that was generating multi-$100 million revenue within 9 months of me starting that business inside of WeWork. I ran multi-100-person teams there. I ran sales globally for the co-working business. But can I tell you something? There has that low, that, because the high, the weeks leading up to that IPO couldn't have been higher. But that low of being at a place that had its face plastered on every social media channel, literally everybody on Twitter was talking about it, every news publication wanted to talk about it, was the collapse and valuability of WeWork. As you have at me, I had just had my second kid. I had just bought an apartment. And so I took on a major mortgage. And so literally within days of taking all these responsibilities, to feel that all that was crumbling like sand in your hand, anyway, sand in your hand, can be incredibly scary. And it goes back to like the base, like first principle. I trust myself. I trust what's going to happen. And obviously, I've had many experiences similar like that earlier on in my career with different stakes. Now with the crew, with my own words, this is why I moved to New York. This is why I came here. It's why I made the sacrifices, is to take a vision that I have of a better, more just world, capitalist system, and to introduce a co-branded savings account. It's not actually buy now, pay later, which is a debt product. We make sure that every retailer and airline in the United States offer consumers a savings option. And inspired by my own experience as a Canadian, to introduce that to Canada. And that's why I'm here. And that's why I think we've gotten so lucky in our early growth.
What are, I guess, and we'll talk about Accrue in a little bit more detail in a minute, but kind of, throughout this whole kind of experience, which you've described, which is, starting companies and the mercurial nature of that, and, being at WeWork, like, what are a couple of things, either business or personal or otherwise, that you've learned, that you're like, oh, this is a lesson that I've learned and that I now apply. Right?
Yeah,
it's changed my approach.
The number one lesson that has stuck with me, and this is from my decision to start LiveStub in 2007 and 2008, and my choice there, is that make sure your ego is not driving your primary driver to your business decisions. That personal experience, when I had made choices because of my ego, it happened because of LiveStub. I made a couple career choices earlier on. It's why I referenced fast tracking to financial success, is that your selfishness or ego or shortcutting is getting in the way of clarity of thought. And those experiences of choices that may have meandered me a little bit far afield to my path has sat with me, continue to sit with me. I mean, in deeply and profound ways. And I think that the other lesson is about network. It happens a little bit when you're in school, but certainly as you become a professional, like that, many people that work at Accrue, many of the investors, most of my cap table at the seed stage and the Series A stage are people that have known me for over a decade. And the communities that anybody decides to follow in the career are actually quite small, but it feels daunting. It feels big because obviously most of these things feel larger in life. But once you're in it, making sure you're building great relationships, trusting relationships over time, can lead someone decades later to bear meaningful fruit. And that's why you have to always come with gratitude.
So I think why don't we start talking about your current venture with Accrue. So maybe to start off, before we even like get into the business and like what Accrue does, like just kind of what led you to make this decision to basically found another company, or where did the business idea come from? Like, can you just kind of explain the process a little bit?
Of course. I mean, I think
like, was this something that was like, I'm not, was this like percolating for a long time? Or
yeah, I mean, so I never thought I would start a company ever again after my live step experience. I mean, it was so hard, so lonely, all the things that one reads about of post-entrepreneurship challenges I had. Your identity is crushed. And that's why I pursued, I tried to stay close to entrepreneurship by working at early stage companies or working in the startup industry, but I never thought that I'd have the stomach for it or the courage to do it again. But that wasn't true. It was me handicapping myself, and not allowing myself to meet my what I believe my potential is. And we can talk about every law school student potential and how you can sort of uncover that over time. It doesn't, what it is today may be different over time. I am Canadian. I have amazing personal experiences that really, when I moved to the United States, I was quite shocked at what the U.S. economic capitalist system, social system was. Quite jarring. I mean, I remember an experience, my first job in New York, and the first day, I'm sure Cam, do you remember this? I was filling out paper forms for my healthcare. And I was like, what is this? Who fills out forms? It's, again, how naive of me that I thought that Canada was the only way to live your life. But that trigger of recognition of how Americans live began me to have constantly evaluating, constantly reassessing how, as someone who lives here, as an immigrant, how I could bring some of those values that I hold dear into the jobs and ultimately now the company that I held. And one of those things was just how American consumerism. I mean, in the United States now, we have $1 trillion in credit card debt in the United States, massive credit card delinquencies that are rising. And a few years ago, I couldn't get over how much people spent when they didn't have it. And it wasn't a business idea. During the pandemic, I remember going on a particular retailer's website and I looked at it, I was like, why am I being pushed so many credit options to buy this thing right now? Buy now and pay in 4 installments. And I was like, I really wanted this thing, really wanted it. I could afford it, put it on my credit, I could afford it. Like, but I don't want to spend $3,000 for this product. I was like, why can't I save for it?
So what you're describing right now is kind of, so this is like the, as you put it, this is the buy now, pay later model that's like very ubiquitous in the United States and elsewhere. And so you had a sense that this is kind of being pushed on consumers, not necessarily in their interest.
It wasn't, by the way, for me, from my own personal experience, my getting there wasn't just about BNPL. Me getting there was my realization that co-branded credit cards being sent to university students, college students, the credit cards being sent in people's mails. It wasn't for me, when I discovered the darkness. I mean, like ideas, entrepreneurs really see light where there is, or zigging where there's zagging. My realization, first off, wasn't a business. It's just like, why do we keep stuffing credit down short-term credit down people's throats? Because there's, it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't feel right to me. And that was a year before I started the company. I was still at WeWork. It was the pandemic. We were trying to right-size that ship. And I moved on. It was just an observation, and I moved on. But as I was about to leave WeWork, and this is a very important career question, so to pull you off Accrue for a second. When I was leaving WeWork, it was maybe the first time in my life that I felt like I was a square peg in a square hole. from a career development standpoint. Every time I had gotten a job before, I had to maneuver my way in. I'm a lawyer, I'm smart, I've done jobs before, I can do business development. Hire me because I can do this job, not necessarily because I have the experience, because I have all the other like soft assets, soft skills, and some hard skills to be able to deliver value to them, but yet sell yourself for those jobs. But at that point, when I was doing WeWork, obviously I had a very high profile, relatively, high profile job at the company. I was doing something very specific, which was running a sales organization. I was going to get a job. I was going to get a great job, really high compensation job. It's almost like I had gotten back to the place that I thought I wanted from when I was 27, 28, 29 years old as a lawyer. I was like, oh, I'm here. But when I started searching for jobs and having serious conversations about roles, it also didn't feel right for me. Something was missing there in my own journey. And I came back to, and I go and talk to mentors, and I started talking about how I'm thinking. And one mentor specifically said to me, they're like, you really want to work for one of my portfolio companies? This little idea that's percolating in your head, you keep saying you don't want to start a company, like maybe explore it for a couple months before you go run in and take another job. You've been literally sprinting. You literally been sprinting for over a decade, sprinting. Startup companies go at a different pace, especially startup companies in New York. Got a different juice to them. Just take a few months and like explore a crew. And wasn't called a crew at that point. Explore this idea of an embedded savings experience. Every retailer should offer incentivized savings. That every retailer should have a wallet. And I remember going back to my wife. I said to her, what do you think about the idea? Americans are saving. She's like, Americans don't save. At this point, we had 2 kids, a mortgage on the Upper West Side. We'd gone through a very difficult time. Like from a WeWork perspective, I was about to get a really great job. She said, what are you talking about? You got great opportunities. Americans don't save. I said, give me a couple months. I'm going to prove to you they do. She said, okay, but you're not allowed to talk to any investors. Again, my network, we talked about network. My network was like very New York venture, very new tech. You're not talking to anyone because it's a false positive. You're going out and raising a couple bucks. I'm like, go. We agreed that if I closed 3 retailers, I had nothing. I had the idea in my head, and maybe I had written it in Google Notes. Maybe in Google Docs. I had to close 3 retailers, and I had to prove to her that Americans wanted it by doing a consumer research report, by begging, borrowing, and stealing, asking a very good friend of mine who runs a very well-known consumer research firm in the United States, New York, to do a deep study for me, like a industrial grade study for me. Long story short, she said, you have 100 days, then you got to get a job. 100 days, you got to get a job. And day 92, I had closed I got commitment from my 5th retailer, and the research report showed me that a majority of Americans are actively saving for things right now. And that was a thing. It wasn't a decision to start the company. I didn't want to start a company. I almost sandbagged the 100 days because I wanted to tell myself that I tried, that I wanted to get a job. No, the world said something different to me. Like there's no way that I should close 5 retailers in 90 days with nothing. I had nothing. There's no reason that this report, which goes against common thesis thinking, to come back a certain way. It was like very statistically relevant study. And when I did it, I remember falling on the floor of in the kitchen in my apartment. My wife was in the other room. And I cried, and I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And I literally, we didn't even say it. I literally got in the subway, cried on the subway, and called a couple engineers that I knew. And a couple hours later, we were building the product. And then on the Friday, it was a Friday, I sent an email to investors that I was not talking to. Again, I was part of the grow. I sent a note to a couple friends. Hey, I'm actually going to start a company. I'm going to raise a seed round. I'm not talking to you for another week. I'm going to do 1 week of fundraising. So if you want to set meetings, it's going to start Monday, blah, blah, of June, whatever it was, end of June of 21. And in July, I forgot the exact date. And we got, was very privileged to raise a great deal of money, in our seed round. And And the company has obviously grown around this vision. And I feel very grateful and privileged. And it was just about the building blocks of all these experiences over time that have gotten me here.
That sounds very exciting. Why don't we talk about the actual business? Okay. So and remember, this is, the audience for this is going to be people who are not, necessarily business savvy or financial experts. So we kind of talked about this buy now, pay later model that you sort of critiqued as, being very ubiquitous in American society and really throughout the developed world, right? So credit is kind of increasingly the way that people make both large and small purchases. So Accrue, it's a savings based model. You've kind of flipped that. I mean, could you call it like, is it like, pay now, buy later, or like how do you brand it? Do you like, savings experience?
Yeah. So when we branded it, so when we started the company, we created a terminology called save now, buy later.
Okay.
That was the original. Save now, by the way, the original idea. We obviously, to create a category, you got to be a little bit loopy to do it, right? Entrepreneurs you got to create categories. You got to want to be able to make a real sacrifice. And so we originally called it Save Now, Buy Later. But we have discovered that the problem is much clearer around a co-branded savings wallet. And that just like retailers have co-branded credit cards, Canadian Tire has one, Hudson Bay has one, Esso has one, Safeway, they all have co-branded credit cards, but they don't have ways to allow you to get rewarded for depositing regularly for your purchase with them. JetBlue WestJet has one, Air Canada has one. But imagine if you could get rewarded for storing value, for storing cash in that account to ultimately purchase with them and incentivize you to do it. You can imagine a day where you're going away on a trip a year from now, but you're saving with Airbnb. You can imagine that you're about to do a home renovation. You're a year and a half away from home renovation. Let's start saving with Home Depot because they're offering me 10% on my money to deposit money in the Home Depot savings account in their savings bank.
So let's maybe to just kind of make this kind of concrete. So I've kind of, I've gone on your website, dug into your business a little bit. Can you just sort of describe, maybe just kind of tell a story, from a consumer standpoint? Imagine there's a hypothetical consumer and they're saving to go on a trip, right? So they're saving to buy plane tickets through Cheapo Air. I think that's one of your partners, right? So yeah. What does that look like from the perspective of the consumer? What do they do? And then what do they get out of, what's the value they get out of your business?
So let's start with the base rule that Americans are actively saving for things. Now Canadians are saving for things too. And there has never been a lot of technology infrastructure, product design, product thinking around how to make savings the most joyful, dopamine-driven, rewards-based framework that we do for gambling and social messaging and investing in stock and using credit, right? We have spent decades around product design, right? And that's really psychology, product design around the dopamine that probably all of the listeners right now are on their phone because a product designer or a couple product designers did a great job on Instagram or TikTok to design their experience. And so for us, we centralized our thinking very much around how can we provide joy to the consumer and the merchant around savings. So let's take Cheapo Air as a great example. I know I want to go away next year. I know I want to go away in 6 months, but I'm not ready to purchase the ticket. So because I don't know exactly where I want to go, or I can't afford it, and I'm credit averse, I don't necessarily want to do it. I start depositing with Cheapo Air because I'm very loyal to Cheapo Air. I get great tickets from them. I'm going to start depositing money with them. And every time I do it, I'm going to earn 6%, 9%, 12% on my deposit. And so you can imagine all the cash rewards that you are earning through depositing money with it. And it's an FDIC savings account. So FDIC is the secure element that American banks have to protect depositors in the United States. Obviously, people are familiar with the Silicon Valley Bank issue. Of anything below 250 is protected, everything above is not. SVB created a unique situation, but that's so this money that a consumer is depositing is protected, always can be withdrawn, but that indication of interest to buy the thing as they're offered to it, over time they're depositing, ultimately they reach their goal, they're ready to make a purchase, they deposit, they buy the product with an individual retailer or airline that they're partnering with. It is now again, I'm going to use terminology that might be might have to explain it. So Camden, hold me honest here. Merchants, retailers spend 20, 25, 30, 40% of their gross purchase price, which we call a cost of acquisition of a customer, on marketing dollars. So when someone buys something at Canadian Tire, at the Bay, at WestJet, they are spending a fortune on Facebook ads, on Google ads, on television ads, on loyalty points. They are spending a fortune
like if a
to
consumer
drive.
buys, like a consumer buys something, Canadian Tire or otherwise, they make a purchase for $100. They buy something for $100. The retailer, the seller, has maybe spent $30 or $40 to acquire that transaction.
Correct. And so the pain point
in marketing or what have you.
So the pain point, or in loyalty, the pain point that we're resolving for merchants is the rapid inflation in cost of acquisition of customers. So merchants have a real problem. They have a couple problems that we're solving for. One is that very little loyalty and affinity for the average retailer. People bounce around. And so how can we capture users that have some level of intent instead of just chasing them with cookies? Cookies are is code implanted on a person's computer that doesn't exist. Third-party cookies don't exist anymore. It's gone the way of the dodo bird in the United States. But you retargeted users to get you to make a purchase. And so the problem is how do I get someone who engaged in my brand earlier to begin to do it? And so what we do to retailers, like, imagine if I started saving with this retailer way before I'm ready to purchase. People take months before they make purchases. That's human behavior. And so we are a marketing tool to get people in the funnel to start to deposit for their future purchases. That is or for their second purchases. I bought something with a retailer, and I want to continue to save up for my next flight or my next trip or my next t-shirt or my next car. The reality here is, like, by doing that, it's the yield and return is far better than in their savings account. High yield savings account.
The pitch to, like, go for it.
No. We just unplugged here, so I just want to. I don't know if you can still see me, but my screen is unplugged.
Hear you, but I can't see you.
Okay.
You're back.
Okay, so the pitch.
Yeah, so the pitch, so, like, I'm assuming that you have metrics or you have data that you could present to your brands or future brands you want to partner with and be like, look, here's evidence that your cost of acquisition is going to be lower through this channel.
Correct. Or your brand affinity is going to be higher, or your size of wallet is going to be bigger. Your basket size is going to be bigger. Someone who's going to spend $2,000, now they're going to spend $2,400 to make a purchase. And so the reality is, you're
getting these kind of consumers to save money, and then they're getting incentives that are kicked in by the brands. And then I want to get to the really important question is, like, where does your revenue come from? Right? It's coming from these brand partners? Yeah. So so they're paying you for access.
Yeah. We have it's a soft SaaS business. We charge a SaaS fee to our merchant partners, and we also take a transaction fee from every transaction. So if people are familiar with the payment space, like that, there's a little vig that's taken on every transaction that merchant processors take, payment processors take. We take a little piece of that as well. So we have a SaaS fee, and we have basically you can look at it like a performance fee. Every time a user makes a purchase, we make money, and we also make money on the float. Right. So the depositors are depositing money with Accrue. They are earning yield, they're earning cash rewards, but it's very much tied to the retailer. So if someone decides, Camden, if you withdraw money from Accrue, you might have been earning 13% every time you deposit money, which actually works out to being like 60% from a if you were to compare it to a high yield savings account, because you're getting that every time you're depositing money versus, $1 gets 3%, but the last $1 doesn't get it for the same amount of time. For us, you
Right.
get it the same amount every time.
Mhm.
The idea is that your reward can't be taken with you. And so as a business model, we take that float. We share that generally with the retailer as well.
Okay. That sounds interesting. I don't really know exactly how to ask you too much about kind of like, where things are going. But could you just talk a little bit about like kind of like what's the future that you're hoping for? I mean, you've done your Series A, right? So you've raised a significant amount of money. And now I'm assuming you're building out the company, you're trying to acquire more brands. Like what's kind of the near to midterm future for Accrue?
The big focus on this business, and it's both the today vision, it's for every retailer, every airline should be offering a savings option. Payment diversity is the key. That's the crux of this business, Camden. It's how, again, goes back to like principles, mission. The mission here is that if Americans should have that choice, they should not just have one option, which is credit. They have three versions of credit options. They could use their credit card, they could use buy now, pay later, or they could use their co-branded credit card. That there should be something, there should be another way that should exist. And so for us, this vision right now is to make sure we empower retailers, merchants, airlines in the United States to turn us on and to partner with us.
On that point, let me just ask you, like, and this might be a totally uninformed question, but just from a customer acquisition standpoint. So how do consumers who'd be interested in saving for purchases, how do they learn about this opportunity? Do they learn about it like from Accrue? Like, do you target them in marketing, or do they learn about it from the brands, and the brands are kind of like offering this as an option?
Yeah, we are, which is why it's really our analog is both. Well, you talked a lot about BNPL. Our analog is like the co-branded credit card. WestJet pushes their credit card. Air Canada pushes their card. And so really the retailers, the airlines, the OTAs are the ones driving this value to the consumer. They are saying to the consumer, we hear you. We have a product that is relevant for Gen Zers and millennials, which we didn't have before. We can't keep offering you a co-branded card that is relevant for your grandparents or your parents. We know that you behave and spend differently. So Gen Zers and millennials are more credit averse than any generation before then. We know we are responding to a particular pain point that exists for you. And so again, when we talk about it as a market acquisition channel, it's also a brand solution for them, so they are responding to the needs of their consumer bases.
Okay, so it's like the brands that are offering this is something that like
it's on their website, it's on their homepage,
yeah.
and their
So they're the ones who are
marketing,
informing.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say about, I guess, maybe the kind of the nuts and bolts of the business, or do you want to move on to another topic question?
I mean, I really want to obviously I want to respond to what you think the audience wants to hear. I mean, again, like this piggy bank.
Well, I'm actually quite interested. I could go on and on. Like it's interesting, hearing someone describe a business that they're creating is very interesting. But I do have some other questions I could ask. So like one question I wanted to ask you, you're Canadian, right? You came to New York. You've been in New York for a number of years. I am American. I moved to Canada from New York. I was just curious if you could talk. I mean, you talked about kind of like healthcare and stuff like that, but could you talk a little bit about like what are some differences or not that you've observed in business culture and in business opportunities in the United States as compared to Canada?
I'm going to make a New York comment first.
Yeah, I mean, and New York is sort of a unique place, so like you can't really generalize the entire U.S. for sure.
Yes. I live, and you also lived here, Camden, we lived in a place, I live in a place that prioritizes work and prioritizes professional achievement and how it defines so many people that you're around. You know, I grew up in Vancouver, went to McGill, went to UBC Law School, but most of my time has been spent in Vancouver. Um, I am amazed at the speed and pace that I operate in here. The difference between the speed and pace that, and by the way, I could imagine it's the same with the law schools too, right? I could imagine NYU Law School moves at a speed and pace that is unique to New York. We feed off that energy in the place, and so which becomes the superpower in itself that you can sort of take in. But I acknowledge that difference, and when you're not from there, you have to constantly choose if you want that pace in your life. You have to sort of like decide: do I want that, and do I want that intensity? That's one major difference, and you and I could talk about this forever. I mean, it manifests so many different ways. It manifests in the types of relationships you form. It manifests in the type of interactions you have, and it manifests in the type of investors and expectations they have, and the speed they want their businesses to grow and excel at. But that's one way that's different. I think in the end there's another way, and for me it's really important. There's nothing like the United States. The United States is unique in its opportunity, and the choice to come here is the choice to take part in that. You can't get it anywhere else. In the United States, New York, but also the United States is primed for this pursuit, and that's positive and negatives. So we have to make choices in the things that we stand correct from a life prioritization standpoint, especially from an outsider perspective. I come home to Vancouver and I sometimes yearn for a family and for the trees and the mountains and the ocean and the smell and the priorities that are different than here. And obviously that deeply resonates with me because I know what I have given up. I think that's really where the major gaps are. And obviously there are political and social differences that manifest. And obviously for me, I try to reflect that energy to the type of business I want to form, right? The type of, I provide 100% healthcare for my employees. I do it because I think it's crazy that healthcare is a thing that is employee tied to employer-employee relationships driven. Because I have this value, this set of values that I hold very dear to me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you said. I mean, I agree with everything you said, but especially about sort of New York being unique. Like I'm originally from upstate New York. I'm from Syracuse, New York, and then I went to law school in New York City, and so I kind of came to New York, and I had the same experience. Like I'd never been around people who were so ambitious and like just so driven, and it was and I mean that in a positive way. Like it was really it like kind of brought out the best in me, right? Like it was really motivating to just be around people who were just so professionally ambitious and so kind of committed to professional success. But I think like later in life, now that I'm older, I think maybe I became a bit disillusioned with that, right? And you realize that there's other things that are, I mean, I think your career is important. I think professional success is important. I think those are very, valid goals to pursue. But there's other things as well, and unfortunately, there are trade-offs involved, right?
Yes.
And so, I've kind of, I wouldn't say that's why I went into academics necessarily, but certainly I would say even after going into academics, something I've kind of, realized more and more. But I also agree with what you said about the, I'm from the U.S. and I have sort of, I'm an immigrant myself to Canada, right? And I quite like Canada, and so my feelings about the U.S. are certainly about like kind of politics and certain socialists in the U.S. Like I'm very ambivalent about. Obviously, the U.S. has its issues, but I do think it is like what you said. It's like it is a unique country, at least for now. Like there's just nowhere else in the world is there so much opportunity, and like nowhere else in the world is there so much money, right? And so if that's what you
Yes.
that's what that's what you're pursuing, like the US is the place to be. I mean, I have a couple of my former students for the last couple of years have been fortunate. They've gotten jobs at big firms in New York, right? And they're thriving, but like they're the kind of, they really wanted that. Like that's what they want, right? And they're working way harder than people who are working in law offices in Vancouver are, and they're making way more money.
Yes.
And there's very serious trade-offs in that calculus, I think. But like, for some people, they thrive in that, at least for a while. And I do think that the US, even though I think it gets criticized a lot, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I think that's like it sounds corny, but like that's important, right? Like it's sort of a special place.
And it's true, right? They're
And there's opportunity, like, I mean, this is gonna maybe verge into like, I don't know, I don't want to get into like politics or anything like that, but like it's not just the opportunity is not, in my personal opinion, it's not just that it's like, oh, there's so much money and there's so many rich people, and so it's like, oh, it's like a really great place for rich people. I mean, there is that kind of opportunity, that the kind of the privileged really benefit. Like there's the inequality in the US is very vast, but I do think there's like just generally more like opportunity for people to like, kind of make unpredictable moves and, move upward in society that there actually is not in a lot of other countries, right? I think there is more social mobility, especially for risk takers in the US than like in European societies, for example.
I caveat things by saying for certain people there's more mobility, and there's a lot of truth to systemic racism, systemic gender inequality that makes it very difficult for people to elevate their career and move up fast from a mobility standpoint. But the opportunity for it to be more just and to be so it's fruitful. This is a fruitful territory for growth for everyone to come. I mean, there's a story of the immigrant. It's so much the American story. The immigrant that comes to the United States and builds their store, that becomes 2 stores, that becomes 5 stores. That Hollywood narrative is very much still true. The converse trade, by the way, it's really hard here. It's uniquely hard to live in the United States. The sacrifices that you make because the risks around healthcare, the cost of education, the social safety net, which is basically non-existent in the United States, unless you are at the very bottom, doesn't makes it uniquely challenging. I think that
there's not much of a safety net in the US, like in a literal sense. Like it's kind of like
literally there's no safety net. And I think like it's sort of like, how I search for the business, and I like my approach is like that means that if you are one of privilege here, you have to be uniquely conscious that you are of privilege. Like and you have to recognize that privilege compounds, I think, in a unique way in the United States. Although there's mobility, unique mobility, and lots of opportunity, I do think there's like compounding privilege here, and that there is a recognition that if you're the CEO of a company that's well capitalized, to be very conscious about your hiring practices. That you just don't hire people who look and talk and walk like you, and Billie Jean King says it. Says this a lot. It said that if you're in a position of power, make sure you make room for those that are not. The United States system has so much surface area for many people to be successful, and we have to just make room for many people to get access to that surface area. Different than I think potentially other places.
So not to ask like a personal question, but like, I mean, do you feel, based on kind of what you're describing, like, do you feel now, you've been in the US like 15 years plus, I take it, like, do you feel, kind of vested in the US and in US society? And the reason I ask that is because like I'm, a newcomer to Canada, and I just recently applied for citizenship, and I actually I don't know why, but I feel very vested in Canadian society. Like I'm like I care about what's going on. I want to vote. Like I've really kind of taken to my environment in sort of a strange way. So I was just kind of curious, like, are these things that are important to you? In the sense of like I guess citizenship, either in the literal or the figurative sense.
I'm first off, I think American politics influence the global system at such a rate that even if you're not in the United States, you feel invested in what goes on here.
Yeah,
deeply invested in what goes on here. I am a political person. I have deeply held political views, and a lot has to do with my own lived experience in Canada and the values that I want to introduce to my children and their friends and the society as a whole. And so I invested in both Canada and in the United States. I'm very much a Canadian. I'm not a U.S. citizen yet. I have a company here. I have hired many my company still has American citizens as employees in this company. I'm a New Yorker, which is its own identity, its own place, its own energy. And it touches you, right? It was 9/11 a couple of days ago, and it just feels a little bit different, right? Like it's not. I'm not experiencing in America. I'm experiencing as a New Yorker, who I think New Yorkers still. I mean, now I've been here for 14 years. I know the risks that you can see it. I lived in Israel for a year in Tel Aviv, right? There was a recognition of living in this place and the risks associated with living in this place because of what happened in 9/11. Obviously, what happened before that in the World Trade Center, previous World Trade Center bombings. I love the United States. I love this place. I love this opportunity that I have all the privileges and the family that I've built here, the life that I've built here. But I still so deeply love Canada, Camden. My family is multi-generation Canadian from Edmonton and Winnipeg and from Vancouver. My life is Western Canadian, and your heart can be in two places, and that's a very hard thing to be, is when your heart is in two places.
Yeah, yes, I completely agree. And as I kind of mentioned before we started the combo, we're gonna have to get you out here to UBC in person, get you back to Vancouver. So I think that's probably at time. There's just like one last thing I want to ask you, so just answer it however you'd like. Just what's a piece of advice you would give to law students who are not necessarily interested in entrepreneurship? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but just are not sure about the traditional big law office career path and are thinking about doing something other unconventional. What advice would you give them?
It's something that I mentioned earlier in this conversation is trust yourself. Trust your gut that's telling you this path is not for you. There are so many different opportunities in life, and that your law degree can serve you well in all facets of that in that experience. And my advice is take the risk, explore the risk, have those conversations. I remember talking to mentors and expressing my concern about my path when I was in law school, and they themselves were former lawyers. And I saw, going back to that model that I applied in the early part of this conversation, is that I saw myself more in them than I saw on the 42nd floor on Bay Street. And when I started to see myself in models, so seek out models, seek out representations of what you want to look like in your career, both professionally and personally, and maybe family life. Maybe there are things you're trying to optimize for that's not necessarily professional. Seek those out, identify those people, because if you identify people that look like something that you want to become, that will help you create a model for your own choices and your own behavior in your life.
Okay. Well, why don't we end it there? Thank you so much, Michael, for doing this. I really appreciate it. The UBC community really appreciates it. I know people are going to benefit from it. So thank you, and I hope to talk to you again, possibly in person sometime soon.
Amazing. Thanks, Camden.